What if I told you that the greatest empire the world has ever known wasn't born from a master plan or in some hull of power, but from a brutal family betrayal, an affair with the god of war, and a she-wolf who mothered 2 abandoned boys? This isn't just a campfire story. This is the foundational myth of Rome, a tale of blood, destiny, and fratricide that shaped the course of Western civilization. This is the epic of Romulus and Remus, and it begins long before Rome even had a name, in a kingdom built on a lie. The seeds of conflict, a kingdom stolen. Our story starts not in Rome, but in Alba Longa, a prosperous city in the hills of Italy, ruled by the wise king Numitor. He was a descendant of the great Trojan hero Aeneas, a lineage that earned him the respect of his people. But power often breeds jealousy, and in Numitor's own family, a dark ambition was stirring. His younger brother, Romulus, watched the throne with envious eyes, seeing his brother's peaceful reign as nothing more than an obstacle. So in a swift and ruthless coup, Romulus seized power. He overthrew his own brother, kicked Numitor out of the palace, and claimed the throne for himself. But a usurper's crown is never safe. Romulus knew the real threat wasn't his deposed brother, but his brother's children. He hunted down Numitor's male heirs, making sure no one could rise up to challenge his stolen throne. Only one of Numitor's children was left, his daughter, Rhea Silvia. To neutralize her, Romulus cooked up a cruel but clever plan. He couldn't just kill her. Spilling royal blood would turn the people against him. Instead, he forced her into a life of piety. He made Rhea Silvia become a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to the goddess Vesta. The Vestals took a sacred vow of chastity for 30 years. Rhea Silvia would have no children, no heirs to the true king. Romulus thought he had secured his legacy. It was the perfect political crime, silencing his rival without spilling a drop of blood. He believed he'd snuffed out the last spark of Numitor's line. But he'd failed to account for the gods, a divine intervention. The sons of Mars forced into the temple, Rhea Silvia's life was supposed to be one of quiet servitude. But destiny isn't so easily cheated. One day, as she went to a sacred grove to draw water, she was visited by a power beyond mortal understanding. Some accounts say she was simply overwhelmed by a divine presence. Others say Mars, the god of war, was captivated by her beauty and lay with her. Whether it was a true divine encounter, or, as the historian Livy suggested, a story Rhea Silvia invented to cover for a more earthly affair, the result was the same. The Vestal Virgin was pregnant with twins. This wasn't just a scandal, it was sacrilege. For Romulus, it was his worst nightmare. The very thing he'd schemed to prevent had happened. Even worse, the children were said to be the sons of Mars himself, a divine heritage that made them an even greater threat to his stolen crown. When the twin boys, Romulus and Remus, were born, Romulus's fear boiled over into rage. These infants were living proof of his failure and a direct challenge to his rule. He couldn't let them live. He couldn't let them grow into men who would one day learn the truth and seek revenge. The king issued a chilling decree, one that would set the legendary events in motion. Cast adrift, a sentence of death. King Romulus's order was simple and brutal. The twin infants had to die. His command was to drown them in the Tiber River, a death that would be quick, quiet, and wash away all evidence. He ordered his servants to do the grim deed, but when they saw the 2 babies, they hesitated. Maybe it was pity, or maybe it was a deep-seated fear of angering the gods by murdering the sons of Mars. They couldn't bring themselves to do it. Just then, the Tiber River was flooding, swollen from heavy rains. This gave the servants an idea. Since they couldn't reach the main current, they placed the boys in a crude basket and set them afloat on the flood's edge, figuring the waters would carry them to their doom. They left them to the elements, convinced the boys would die one way or another. But the river that was meant to be their tomb became their savior. As the floodwaters receded, the basket didn't sink. Instead, it floated gently downstream until it snagged in the roots of a wild fig tree at the base of what would one day be the Palatine Hill. The infants, condemned by a mortal king, were now delivered to the very heart of their destiny, protected by a power far greater than Romulus could imagine. They were alone and crying from hunger, but their story was far from over. An unlikely guardian was about to appear. The Wolf Mother, an unlikely savior. It was the baby's cries that drew her near. A she-wolf, a lupa in Latin, emerged from the woods. In any other story, this would be the end. But this was no ordinary wolf. Wolves were sacred animals to Mars, the twins' own father. Instead of harming them, the wolf was driven by a maternal instinct. She approached the basket, gently licked the infants clean, and then, in an image that became the immortal symbol of Rome, she lay down and nursed the human babies as if they were her cubs. Her den, a cave later known as the Lupercal, became their first home. Some versions of the story say another of Mars's sacred creatures, a woodpecker, also helped, bringing them bits of food. For days, this wild creature protected and nourished the sons of a god and a princess. This scene is the very heart of the Roman foundation myth. The she-wolf, a fierce predator, represents the military strength and wild spirit that would define Rome for centuries. Her nurturing also speaks to Rome's ability to grow and turn a dangerous world into a source of life. But there's a fascinating, darker layer to this story. The Latin word lupa didn't just mean she-wolf in the slang of the time, it was also a word for a prostitute. This has led some historians, ancient and modern, to suggest a more rational explanation. Maybe the wolf who saved the boys wasn't an animal, but a woman of ill repute named Acca Larentia, the wife of the shepherd Faustulus, who was known by this nickname. This duality is quintessentially Roman. It suggests the city's origins are both divine and humble, born of a god but raised by the lowest rungs of society, a city that is both sacred and profane. Whether their savior was a beast or an outcast, the twins survived, waiting to be discovered. A shepherd's care, a humble upbringing. The twins' strange sanctuary didn't stay secret for long. One day, a local shepherd named Faustulus was tending his flock on the Palatine Hill when he saw the unbelievable sight of a she-wolf caring for 2 human children. Astonished, he waited for the wolf to leave before gathering the infants in his arms and taking them home to his wife, Acca Larentia. Childless themselves, the couple decided to raise the boys as their own, naming them Romulus and Remus. They kept the secret of how they found them, telling no one about the she-wolf. The twins grew up far from the treachery of courts, living the simple, rugged life of shepherds. But even in this humble setting, their divine heritage couldn't be hidden. Romulus and Remus grew up taller, stronger, and bolder than the other boys. They had a natural charisma and a gift for leadership. Soon, they were leading a band of young shepherds, not just protecting their own flocks, but fighting bandits who plagued the countryside and sharing the loot with their followers. They were becoming local heroes, completely unaware of the royal blood in their veins. But their peaceful life was about to end, and a collision with their past was inevitable. The truth revealed, a prince's destiny. The growing reputation of Romulus and Remus soon led to trouble. Their activities started to infringe on the lands of the deposed king, Numitor, who was living a quiet life nearby. A fierce argument broke out between the twins' followers and Numitor's herdsmen, which escalated into a brawl. In the chaos, Remus was captured. Numitor's men dragged Remus to Alba Longa to face justice, not before the usurper Romulus, but before Numitor himself, as Romulus had given him authority over minor disputes. As Remus stood before his own grandfather, neither man recognized the other. Still, Numitor was struck by the young man's defiant spirit and noble bearing. He saw a flicker of his own family in Remus's face and started asking about his origins. Meanwhile, back on the hill, Faustulus knew the clock was ticking. He'd always suspected the boys were of noble birth. Fearing for Remus's life, he finally told Romulus everything he knew about finding them by the river, the she-wolf, and the royal-looking basket. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. At the same time, in Alba Longa, Remus's answers to Numitor's questions, his age, his twin brother, and history of their discovery, stirred the old king's memory. The timeline matched perfectly. The truth, buried for nearly 2 decades, was finally revealed. Numitor realized the young man before him was his own grandson. The family, torn apart by betrayal, was suddenly miraculously reunited. But this was no time for tears. With the truth came a single burning purpose: vengeance. Vengeance and restoration. The fall of a tyrant. The truth lit a fire in Romulus. Armed with the knowledge of who he was and what had been done to his family, he acted with the kind of speed and resolve that would one day define the Roman army. He rallied his shepherds, now a small rebel force, and marched on Alba Longa. Inside the city, Numitor and Remus had already started an uprising of their own. A 2-pronged attack was launched against the tyrant Romulus. Romulus and his men stormed the city from the outside, while Remus led the insurrection from within. The palace guards were quickly overwhelmed. Romulus and Remus fought their way to the throne room and confronted their great-uncle, the man who had ordered their deaths. The usurper's reign ended as it had begun, with violence. The twins killed Romulus, avenging their mother and grandfather in a single act of justice. With the tyrant dead, they presented themselves to the people of Alba Longa, with Numitor at their side. They told the full story of their birth, abandonment, and miraculous survival. The people hailed them as heroes. Romulus and Remus had their revenge, and they restored their grandfather, Numitor, to his rightful throne. Justice was served. But for men with their ambition and divine blood, living in another man's kingdom, even their grandfather's, was not enough. Destiny was calling them to build a legacy of their own. A city of their own. The seeds of discord. Though they were heroes in Alba Longa, Romulus and Remus had no desire to stay. Their hearts belonged to the land where they had been saved, the 7 hills by the Tiber River. It was there, at the site of the she-wolf's den, that they decided to build a new city. And it was right here, in this moment of shared ambition, that the first fatal crack appeared in their bond. The question wasn't if they'd build a city, but where. The brothers, once united, were now divided by pride. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill. It was centrally located, easy to defend, and the very spot where they'd been found. For him, it was the logical choice. Remus, however, was drawn to the nearby Aventine Hill. It was also a strong position, but perhaps he just wanted a spot that was his alone, not one defined by their shared past. Their disagreement wasn't just a dispute over real estate. It was a clash of wills between 2 brothers who had always been equals, but now both wanted to be the one true founder. Unable to agree, they turned to the ancient ritual of augury to let the gods decide. They would each stand on their chosen hill and watch the sky for an omen in the form of sacred birds. They put their brotherhood in the hands of fate, not realizing the divine message they sought would be tragically unclear, leading not to a resolution, but to their ruin. The fatal omen, brother against brother. The contest began at dawn. Romulus stood on the Palatine, Remus on the Aventine, each watching the heavens. The fate of their city and their brotherhood hung in the balance. The first sign appeared to Remus. A flight of 6 magnificent vultures soared over the Aventine hill. He cried out in triumph, certain the gods had chosen him. But just moments later, an even more powerful sign appeared to Romulus. 12 vultures, double the number, wheeled over the Palatine. A furious argument erupted. Who had truly won? Remus's supporters argued he had because he saw the first sign. But Romulus and his much larger group of followers claimed his sign was superior because of the number. The ritual that was meant to bring clarity had instead created a bitter feud. Ignoring his brother's claim, Romulus declared himself the victor. He returned to the Palatine Hill and, with a plough pulled by a white bull and cow, began the sacred rite of marking his new city's boundaries. He carved a furrow, the pomerium, which would be the foundation for its walls. As Romulus's men began to build, Remus, seething with resentment, approached the site. In a fatal act of mockery, he began to taunt his brother's work. To show his contempt for the little wall, he leaped over it. For Romulus, this was the ultimate insult. It wasn't just childish. It was a sacrilegious act that defiled the sacred boundary of his city, a bad omen suggesting its defenses could be easily breached. In a flash of rage, the founder king's fury overcame brotherly love. Some stories say Romulus struck Remus down himself. Others claim it was one of his followers. But the result was the same. Remus fell, bleeding onto the very ground they had planned to build their future on. As his twin lay dying, Romulus is said to have uttered the chilling words that would echo through Roman history. "So shall it be henceforth for anyone else who dares leap over my walls." The argument was over. The city had its founder, its location, and its name. And it was consecrated with the blood of a brother. The founding of Rome, a city born in blood. With Remus dead, buried on the hill he had so desperately wanted, Romulus stood alone, the undisputed founder and king. He named the new city Rome after himself. The act of fratricide, of founding his city on his own brother's blood, would forever haunt the Roman psyche, a dark reflection of the civil wars that would plague the Republic centuries later. But Romulus was a pragmatic leader. A city needs more than walls, it needs people. To populate his new settlement, Romulus declared it a sanctuary, an asylum for all comers. He welcomed fugitives, runaway slaves, exiles and debtors. Men from all over Italy, seeking a fresh start or fleeing a dark past, flocked to the Palatine Hill. Rome quickly grew into a bustling, if rough, community of hardy men. This, however, created a new problem. There were no women. The surrounding tribes looked down on Rome as a haven for outcasts and refused to let their daughters marry Roman men. A city of men wouldn't last a generation. So Romulus turned to a solution that was both cunning and brutal. He announced a grand festival and invited the neighboring peoples, especially the Sabines, to attend with their families. The Sabines came, suspecting nothing. In the middle of the festivities, at a signal from Romulus, the Roman men drew their swords and rushed into the crowds, abducting the young, unmarried Sabine women to be their brides. This event, known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, was a mass bride theft that immediately led to war. The enraged Sabine fathers and brothers marched on Rome. But in a dramatic turn, the Sabine women themselves, who by now were married to the Romans and in many cases had children, intervened. They ran onto the battlefield, placing themselves between their fathers and husbands, and begged them to stop fighting. Their courageous act ended the war and forged a new alliance. The Sabines and Romans united, with Romulus sharing his rule for a time with the Sabine king, Titus Tatius. Through violence and forced assimilation, Rome had secured its future. The legacy and the legend, man to God. Romulus ruled Rome for nearly 40 years, a reign filled with the deeds of a great founder. He established the city's core institutions, creating the first legions and appointing the first 100 senators, the patres, or fathers, from whom the patrician class would descend. He laid the legal and social groundwork that would evolve into the Roman Republic and Empire. His end, like his beginning, is shrouded in myth. The story goes that one day Romulus was reviewing his army on the field of Mars when a violent storm erupted. A whirlwind descended, enveloping the king in darkness. When the storm passed, Romulus was gone. He had vanished from the earth. The Roman people were thrown into grief, but a prominent senator named Proculus Julius came forward with an incredible story. He claimed Romulus had appeared to him in a divine vision, declaring that it was the God's will for Rome to be the capital of the world. He commanded the Romans to master the art of war and announced that he had ascended to the heavens to become a god. The Romans embraced this story, believing their founder had undergone an apotheosis, a transformation into a deity. From that day on, they worshipped him as the god Quirinus, a divine protector of the Roman people. The boy saved by a wolf, who had murdered his own brother, had become a god, his legacy forever tied to the divine destiny of the city he built. Conclusion: myth, history, and identity. The story of Romulus and Remus is a whirlwind of betrayal, survival, and tragedy. It's the story of how two abandoned infants nursed by a wolf rose to kill a king and lay the foundation for an empire. The iconic image of the Lupa and the twins became the eternal symbol of Rome itself, representing its fiercest strength, divine favor, and ability to nurture a civilization from the harshest of beginnings. But did any of it actually happen? For the ancient Romans, this was history, not myth. They could point to the Lupercal cave as physical proof. Modern historians, however, see it as a foundational myth, a story crafted centuries after the city's traditional founding in 753 BC to explain Rome's origins and character. The earliest complete written accounts we have date from the late 3rd century BCE, hundreds of years after the fact, leaving plenty of time for the story to grow and change. The legend weaves together Greek hero tales, local folklore, and political propaganda. But whether it's fact or fiction, the myth's real power is what it tells us about how the Romans saw themselves. They saw themselves as a people of destiny, fathered by the god of war and chosen for greatness. They understood that civilization is often born from violence, that their city's foundation required the blood of a brother, and its future required the abduction of wives. The myth reflects the core Roman values of ambition, strength, and a brutal, pragmatic will to survive and expand. The story of Romulus and Remus isn't just about how Rome was born, it's about what it meant to be Roman. If you found this journey into Roman myth fascinating, hit the like button and tell us in the comments what part of this epic legend stands out to you the most. For more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world, don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Thanks for watching.